Rajiv Memani, let me get you in on this aspect as well, on how global investors are viewing the India story at this point in time and what you believe will be the India advantage that can be leveraged.
Yeah, I would say by and large, when people come from different parts of the world and they come to India, the general optimism in India is right now probably very high. I think the budget delivered a very good message in terms of government's focus on macroeconomics. The investments in infrastructure and the multiplier impact of that, fiscal deficit, so on and so forth. So I would say by and large they are very excited about India. They want to invest more. And I'm talking more about not so much people who are investing in the markets, but much more about private equity, venture capital, foreign direct investment, strategic investors. So they are, I think, and some of the things that have happened, some very bold decisions over the last maybe last year and a half, including the one on Vodafone right now. I think that's also opening up the minds of people to say, yes, if the government really wants, they can move, they can move things. So overall, very positive. And Shireen, the main thing is from a manufacturing standpoint, I still think that the investors, unless they're in very, very specific sectors, if people are looking at large tracts of land, if people are looking at some labor issues and how they resolve that, if someone wants to export, a couple of $1 billion from India, $2-3 billion, the red carpet and the path for that is still not clear. So how the central government and state government work together to make that happen, I think that will be very, very important. Because
so you're saying there's still a question mark there?
It's not a question mark. I would say there is still ambiguity to say, okay, how do we do it? Suppose I want to manufacture something, textiles or toys or some, more labor-intensive industries, and I really want to hire 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people. Are there enough examples for me to say, okay, or someone can help me guide through the whole process and say, how do I get 100 acres of land? Can I create a building structure around me so that people can work? What are the labor laws? Will people work 2 shifts, 3 shifts? So those kind of really details, and that's where I think if we can work and create some templates of that, then that will be very useful.
And Zareen, I want you to comment on this, because this really is being positioned as the big opportunity, as our big moment, as global supply chains diversify and India emerges as a credible alternative, especially from a manufacturing perspective. To Rajiv Memani's point, are the pieces that we need to put in place, the building blocks that we need to put in place there yet? Are we closer to an inflection point today, to your mind?
I would say we are closer to an inflection point. Maybe if I look at 3-4 years back compared to that, I mean, when I went to US on my road shows, almost every MNC was very interested in India. To that extent, I would say we are really at an inflection point. Having said that, we shouldn't underestimate our other countries who are really also wooing a lot of the FDI, like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, which are also becoming, and the whole ASEAN bloc is becoming quite a big beneficiary of the China Plus One. Having said that, I think our PLI scheme has been really, and the low corporate tax rate has been really attracting foreign direct investment in a meaningful way.
Well, so that I think is the unaddressed part of the challenge and the opportunity. So the challenge presents itself as an opportunity as well. Adar, let me come to you now, because the expectation is that we will continue to move higher when it comes to the pharmaceutical as well as the vaccine manufacturing story. We have, of course, positioned ourselves as the global hub of the world. But how much of the quality concerns, and there have been many in the last few months, how much of that has cast a shadow on the industry at this point in time, as well as the way that the industry is being viewed globally?
So there are these few isolated incidences which, of course, the regulator and others will take care of. Wherever you look at anything that's gone wrong in any industry, despite having the best regulation, highest level of regulation, you always have a few players who may not comply or may have some issues, and even that is yet to be investigated. I don't think there's a final conclusion on whomsoever had quality issues, was it product related or not. So I won't comment on that. But largely speaking, India's image, especially with the COVID crisis and before that even, as the pharmacy of the world, is very, very strong. you know, whether it's at Davos or any of these global events, you see the interest that we have. But I'll tell you one or two things that we need to do to continue that momentum, and it's very critical, especially now that China, Korea, and the African continent are also investing and having a lot of capital flow there to make pharmaceuticals and vaccines. We need to press on with the reforms that we have suggested to the government. Government's been very proactive. We've already made a lot of changes, like, you know, the stockpile permission, so you don't lose 9 months between, you know, clinical trials and research and then building up the vaccine stock or pharmaceutical stock. Reforms, and also building our supply chain in India. You know, especially the pharmaceutical industry has been dependent on APIs and imports from China. You're seeing a lot of investment now being made in India by domestic players to be totally self-reliant. And I think that's really going to change the whole way in which things happen. Of course, prices may go up a little bit as a result, but that's initial. And then, you know, competition will take care of that. So I think these two things are very important for us to continue. And, you know, to answer your point, I don't think anything's going to affect the India image. One or two of these incidences which then get blown out of proportion.
Mr. Kotak, you know, since we are talking about the roadmap from resilience to resurgence, I want to understand from you, we've already discussed in detail, great detail, the announcements that have come in from the budget and the potential impact of those announcements. But if there's anything on the unaddressed reform agenda side, especially from a financial sector perspective, you know, what would you like to prioritize at this point in time to really have that multiplier impact? And it could be outside of the financial sector as well.
So first, on the financial sector, if you look at the budget speech, the finance minister has talked about a need for review of financial sector regulation as in the budget speech, and has said the time has come for us to be looking at the entire financial sector regulation and review the impact and reassess the need for some of that regulation. So this is in the budget speech. So I think this is clearly on the agenda of the government, and I'm sure they must be talking with regulators to put a process in place to get feedback and make appropriate changes in the financial sector regulation. I think that's extremely important, that in the year when India is at G20, India benchmarks its own regulatory framework to the best in class. And we have to evaluate where we stand in the G20 in terms of our regulation in any sector, including the financial sector.
So where do we stand?
I think that is an assessment which must be done, and I'm sure that is maybe the driver for this particular point which the finance minister has put in her budget speech, and it's something which will be hopefully acted on in the current year. And revisit regulation. So what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and she has said across all regulators, all financial sector regulators. So I think that's a very big change and an open mind which the government has demonstrated in this year's budget.
But in your assessment, specifically from a financial sector point of view, from a regulatory perspective, what do you believe requires change?
I think it's a long list of things which we need to
Give
discuss.
Me the top
and
three.
I think
Give me the top three.
I think the top three clearly is how is it that India is going to build capacity for the size of its ambition as a significantly larger economy. So I think that would be item number 1, 2, 3. Therefore, every action we take must be consistent with building India at scale, and the financial sector should be able to meet and address the requirements of India across the board.
Vaidyanathan, let me get you to comment on that as well. Financial sector and outside of that as well.
On this point that Uday just made, what is the capacity India is creating? Let me talk about it from a retail point of view, because it's a very important part of the story. So today's India's retail book is about retail personal credit alone is close to about $600 billion. That's about 50 lakh crores. On an economy, let's call it 300 lakh crores, which is about, say, 16-17%. Now, as in India moves toward the US kind of numbers, say 92%. US, by the way, is a $19.6 trillion consumer credit on a $22 trillion economy. That's like 95%. So as we migrate this path, one thing India has got right early on in the game, while it's still very small on consumer credit, is that our ecosystem of credit bureau, which is a very good guardrail, the cash flow lending, the UPI-based collection, India has developed that and credit assessment through digital channels. So India has got those guardrails right before we started the credit journey, which should give a lot of comfort to all of us that we're not, hopefully not going to have a huge credit cycle along the way.